The deck set actually does brings like a wave of fever for Favrneel, to the point where I actually nicknamed Favrneel Favrneel. It's really bad, but still, I do see an increased amount of people playing Favrneel now. Yeah, the deck is really good. It might just rival those in the meta. This video is sponsored by Phoenix Ferro Cards. If you need supplies of singles or splits for Cardfight Vanguard, especially the ones in the video, do check out Phoenix Ferro Cards today, and as a bonus, use the promo code MetaNerd to get an amazing 5% discount. And with that being said, let's get on with the video. Greetings YouTube, welcome back to the MetaNerd channel. I am Marcus, bringing you another video for Cardfight Vanguard Willdress. In this video, we'll be going through my deck profile for Favrneel with the introduction to the deck set that Favrneel received. Favrneel technically does not really receive a lot of support from the last time we actually discussed this deck profile, but over the course of I think like a few booster sets, he does receive like quite decent amount of cards. For example, the grade 1 exaggerated Draco kit, which is treated as a grade 3 in the soul whenever you are a grade 3, which is definitely going to be nice. And then with this new deck set, Bushi actually introduced a grade 3 that is basically a personal ride for Favrneel, which kind of makes this deck like not really reliant on the cup already. So that is a very good grade 3 for Favrneel. It does change the game plan for Favrneel quite a bit, but after some build iteration of Favrneel deck that I tested, for some reason I feel like the hand size isn't really that big until I basically get the idea of running certain stuff from another YouTuber, which I will link down in the comment section. Only then is where the deck feels a little bit smooth. Without further ado, let's take a look at my deck profile for Favrneel. So here is the overall deck list that I am currently running for Favrneel, and yes, he is currently running the Unica Rideline. I saw this Rideline in another YouTuber, which I will link down in the comment section. It's a Japanese YouTuber. The fight video that they make is what gave me the idea to put Unica Rideline. Basically, the rest of the stuff is there just to support Favrneel by getting a lot of grades into the soul, while at the same time provide with more power as well as board control, and not to mention some draw engine in terms of Gunnoram. It's pretty much standard, and we do run like a very heavy grade 3 lineup. For the PGs, I actually do recommend run 4 of the normal Dark States PG. If you want to run the Elementaria Sanctitude, you can, but of course, if Elementaria Sanctitude goes to the soul, Favrneel does not really count that card as one grade, so be very careful. The strongest support of this deck, I think, is going to be the grade 3 order, which I am currently obstructing. This card basically recycles whatever grade 3 is in your drop zone or your deck to be superior call out. I mean, most of your grade 3s are just disgusting. This deck flows very well, but of course you will need some time to practice with this deck to get an understanding on what pieces you will want in your hand and what pieces to throw, especially with the cycle card being in the mix of this deck profile. So let's break this deck profile down, and hopefully you will get the idea of why I run certain pieces in this deck and how to properly pilot this deck. It's a little bit tough for beginner to play this deck, but I'm sure with practice as well as experience, you will do just fine with this deck. So let's start off with the trigger lineup. The trigger lineup is of course going to be the standard heavy crit lineup, where you just run like 8 crits and 3 fronts, 1 over trigger and 4 heals. It's the standard lineup where you don't really want to have draws in this deck. Having 8 criticals basically maximize the pressure that you are able to apply to the opponent, because this deck is able to kill from the 4th damage. Thanks to Favrneel getting the +1 crit, you are just basically applying pressure after pressure. He is just disgusting. Front triggers are really great to power up your front row. Since you are able to personal right now with Favrneel, the front triggers actually do matter quite a bit. Back in the days where you can't really personal right as often, your rear guards are just very cute. And what's more, the front triggers are 20k shield, so it does helps a little bit in terms of defense, although the defense is still not really that great, which is why you love to take damage from your opponent to, you know, fuel Favrneel skill. Favrneel costs 2 counterblast, so this deck really likes to take damage, except maybe not too much. The over trigger that I run is the blue over trigger, but of course there's literally no right or wrong option for you to run. You can choose to run the red OT or the dark states OT. These three OTs have their usefulness. I run the blue OT is because this deck wants to apply an enormous amount of pressure to the opponent, basically just force them to guard every single attack. With the blue OT acting as the 9th critical trigger, it actually do wonders. And not only that, you are able to salvage whatever card that is in your drop zone back to hand, is just helping the defense of Favrneel big time. The red OT is okay, I would say, but of course you don't really want to rely on your rearguard's hits as much, considering that they don't gain any critical. So this card I think is the less useful one. In very niche situation, you are able to force out a 5th attack is definitely going to be great, but as a general rule, I don't think the red OT is much more useful than the blue OT, but that's just my opinion. The dark states OT is without a doubt going to be the most disgusting one. It's not the most consistent, but it is the most dangerous, because if you are able to check the dark states OT very early on, I mean before you ride into Favrneel, at that point Favrneel is just on steroids or cheat code, and you are able to soft contain your opponent's counterblast, something which is normally overlooked, but still the dark states OT providing an extra critical to Favrneel is just brutal. Draw trigger is not really recommended in this deck because you will deck out. I'm telling you, even with the current lineup of triggers that we have, I am almost decking out every single game. Imagine what draw triggers could do. Unless of course you're running other stuff that doesn't soul charge or draw as much, then sure, you are able to run draw triggers, but for this build I prefer the front triggers a little bit more. For the Rideline, like I said, we are running the Unica Rideline because for some reason Unica Rideline is the only Rideline that we have currently in dark states that has a confirmed soul charge 2. Sure, the Bruise Rideline do have soul charge, but it's technically only soul charging 1. Jewel does soul charge 1, but you need to unhit for you to get the soul charge 1. So Unica Rideline being able to help you soul charge 2 from the deck is actually very, very nice. You could potentially soul charge up to 6 grade into the soul, provided both cards you soul charge are grade 3. If that were to happen, I'm telling you, you will definitely be able to get 13 grades in the soul by the time you first ride into Favrneel. From my experience playing this deck, you should basically just treat the draw from the grade 1 Unica Ridelines as a bonus, because you won't necessarily soul charge a critical into the soul. They are just there for the consistency to getting grades into the soul. And don't mind too much if you do not really soul charge a critical trigger. It's not that big of a deal. You just want the soul charge too. But in all honesty, any Rideline actually works quite well for Favrneel, be it the Bruise, Jewel. With Bruise, you have more control over your soul rather than, you know, soul charge 2, you're only soul charging 1. You do get a confirmed draw, where Unica is much more of a situational draw. Jewel is by far the more aggressive one, since you are able to Superior Call the grade 1 out to the field, which will then move back into the soul, just to force your opponent to attack into the Vanguard instead of the rearguard, since the grade 1 Jewel Rideline goes back to soul after he attacks or boosts, which is definitely going to be nice. One other unique Rideline that you can run is basically a combination of exaggerated Draco Kit as well as Squalid Freaks. They are really nice, and it's basically confirming 5 to 7 grades in the soul without needing you to set up as much as the other builds. If you're running that Rideline, I find that you are lacking in hand just a little bit, because the hands tend to be smaller than the other Rideline, at least in my opinion. Once again, of course, any grade 0s or extra grade 0s or triggers that is in the soul can be used for your other skills, be it a Psycho card or a Gunnoram. Those other cards that are basically just there just so that they aren't go to waste in a sense. I think by far Unica's Rideline is the best one so far, but who knows, another card might just change the choices for the Rideline. Next, for grade 1s, we are only running 2 grade 1s, 3 Gunnoram as well as 4 Sargon. These 2 are going to be the main booster or attacker, if of course you don't get like your attackers, because one issue of this deck is that you will always want to put your grade 2s and grade 3s into the soul for the soul grade requirement, which kind of end up you calling either Gunnoram or Sargon to the front row to attack. But still, they are really excellent boosters as well as soul resources. They are what they do. They are basically like the face of dark states at this point. Sargon is by far the most important card in this deck. If you don't get Sargon on the first turn, your consistency in getting grades into the soul will dramatically drop. Sargon basically carries this whole deck. Whatever you discard or soul blast, you're able to basically recycle them back to the soul, which effectively makes certain skills basically free. Sargon actually works really well with Gunnoram in terms of fueling for Gunnoram Soul Blast 3 to drop. It also applies a on-hit pressure to force the opponent to either guard or take the damage and risk, you know, you getting your consistency in getting grades into the soul. From my experience, there's really no point for you to guard early game Sargon, especially the one that is boosting the Vanguard, because I mean, sure, you may delay Fafnir's restanding skill, but the problem here is that you will have to no guard at some point. The later the game progresses, you will risk eating more damage than you should, because Favrneel does gains a crit after the 4th turns. But still, it might be a strategy just to keep yourself at low damage, but still, I don't think that's gonna fly. Gunnoram is basically a bonus unit. You don't necessarily need Gunnoram. I would argue that you can play Exaggerated Draco Kit instead of Gunnoram, but if we are only comparing both Gunnoram as well as Exaggerated Draco Kit, the requirement for you to have a grade 3 in the soul in order for you to even soul charge, I think that's going to be a big problem, I would say, because the moment you call down Draco Kit, it's actually a -1 already, whereas Gunnoram is able to soul charge regardless. Draco Kit is basically just dead until you put him into the soul with other skills, then he's basically useful. But at that point, it's basically a -1 to your hand already. So Exaggerated Draco Kit isn't really that great, I would say, and I would definitely prefer Gunnoram here. So yeah, these are the two great ones that is basically carrying the deck. I mean, more so in terms of Sargon. One last thing is that if you are going up against Ridelines that do not really have like a rear guard, or you know, for example Eva, or they do have rear guards, it's just that those rear guards have resist, you need to think a little bit in terms of what to discard. Next, we have the Psycho card. Favrneel is the sole reason why this card increases in price big time. This girl here is basically their discard fodder, personal right combo, as well as board building. Favrneel is perhaps the only Dark States deck that could effectively use the Psycho card. Since your grade 0s are irrelevant to the deck's game plan, you are able to just Soul Blast your grade 0s out to use for this skill, which effectively making your cost like negligible. She is able to maintain your hand size provided if you keep discarding her, and could potentially dig for more pieces, which is definitely going to be very nice. And comboing Laminia with the new grade 3 card that we received for Favrneel, you are able to not -1. You are able to bind him from the soul and discard a card to activate Personal Right. Yes, you do draw back that discard, but still, why do you even need to discard a card to activate Personal Right? That's a little bit on the weird side. But thanks to Laminia here, if you discard Laminia for the cost of Hrodis, and since it is still the right phase, you are therefore able to draw 2 cards instead of 1, thanks to these 2 cards combo here. Very nice combo, and I didn't even think about this combo too much until I start reading her skill once again. One other thing of Laminia here is that you should consider keeping her in the hand and not discard her too much when you're going up against a board control matchup, for example Gandiva or Gravidia. She does has a personal right skill, which is basically on place Counterblast 1 to call something from the soul and soul charge 1. She does help with board building, but that is pretty much matchup dependable. You don't really want to use this skill as much because it costs 1 Counterblast. So yeah, it's a little bit expensive because of the fact Favrneel used 2 Counterblasts. The best thing about this card is you are able to call anything, and by anything I mean the grade 1 Unica Rideline. You have to be extra mindful in terms of your soul grade count, because if you decided to use Hrodis, since he does bind himself from the soul, it means that your soul grade count is -3 upon using Hrodis skill. So you will need to be extra careful and be sure that you are able to reach 13 soul grade count. Otherwise, it might just backfire really hard. The other grade 2 that we are playing is of course Squalid Freaks. I mean, Squalid Freaks is basically Fafnir's dedicated support. He is the soul fodder, the discard fodder, as well as power booster. He counts himself as a grade 4 after turn 4. This card contributes the most when in the soul after turn 4. He is basically the sole reason you are able to soul blast stuff out for a draw or a personal right. He will always be a priority unit to be put to soul either from Fafnir's skill or Aligo's skill or any other skills that basically need you to put something from your hand or rearguard to the soul. He will always be the priority unit. The bonus of this unit is actually providing the front row with a 5k power, which is definitely nice, but it's basically once per game since he does bind himself after you use his skill. So you will need to plan ahead if you are able to get 13 soul grade count after you use Squalid Freaks. And since Squalid Freaks does not really restrict you to the first Favrneel swing, you can actually activate Squalid Freaks skill upon the second swing of Favrneel. At the moment, we do not have a way to recycle him from the buying zone, which is a shame. So all in all, this card does provide Favrneel with a very threatening combo, especially if you have 4 Squalid Freaks in the soul. That's basically a 20k to the front row. Very disgusting number, but it is once per game, unfortunately. Next are your bricks. The grade 3s. All these 3 grade 3s have almost the same function in this deck, I would say. Most of them are just soul fodder, discard fodder, personal right, attacker, as well as, you know, board snipe. All 3 of them do have the skill to actually retire your opponent's rearguard. Max copies of Eligos as well as Herodis are recommended. Herodis is your personal right, as well as Eligos is the retire one as well as countercharge. He is the only countercharge card in this deck. And considering Favrneel costs 2 counterblast, yeah, he is definitely going to be at 4 copies. The only other grade 3 card that we have is Crucial Dragon. Crucial Dragon, not only is he a grade 3, he is also a situational 10k shield, which I actually appreciate. There are a lot of scenarios where I'm basically 10k short, and since the opponent do check a trigger, this card basically is a 10k shield, which do save my butt really often. All 3 of this grade 3s fare decently well as an attacker. I mean, most of the time you will just want to call them out to be an attacker, and most of their power does comes from the personal right as well as Squalid Freaks, so they don't really gain a lot of power except Crucial Dragon. Treat the OT bind part as a bonus because the bind the OT skill is basically just very niche. It's either you guard with the 50k OT or it just ends up in the soul. It's very rare that it appears in a drop zone. Just treat it as a bonus and just be mindful that he has that skill is what I'm saying. All 3 has board control, which is definitely going to be nice. This deck basically just slowly grinds out the opponent's board no matter what they have. Once again, since all these are grade 3s and they are so essential for Favrneel's game plan, this other card is just insane in this deck, and it makes sense why this card is a Regali's piece. You are able to just fish out whatever grade 3s that you need, be it the countercharge or personal right. This card is disgusting. The only sad part about Forbidden Surrogate is he's not a Dark States card, so if this card goes to the soul, the grade 3 is basically not a non-existent. So do be very careful and do be mindful if you have a Favrneel opponent and he does count this 3 grades as part of the soul requirement. So yeah, just be mindful. Last but not least is of course Favrneel, your boss unit. With the current support that we receive, this dragon here is basically just leaves and breathes pressure. Thanks to the double crit that he gains after turn 4, he is just very pressuring to guard against. One of the weakness that this deck has is that this deck relies a lot on putting your hand to the soul skill, which means that you will need to retire your opponent's rearguard to keep putting cards into the soul to draw, as well as Sargon for consistency. If this 2 aspect of this card is taken away, this deck is as good as dead. Board snipe skill is basically very nice in terms of grinding out the opponent, but the only sad part is that the opponent gets to choose what to retire. Any critical triggers that this unit checks is recommended to give to the rearguards, because once your rearguards hit for double crit, and double crit, your opponent will crumble to the pressure, especially at 4 damage. One last thing I would like you guys to remember if you plan to play Favrneel, always confirm and reconfirm your soul grade count before any skill, because it is very important that you get numbers right. If you don't get numbers right, once Favrneel is not able to restand, you are basically in very deep trouble. That's all I'm gonna say. Keep this to heart if you want to play Favrneel, and hopefully you're able to win with this deck. This deck is insane, I'm telling you. And that is all for this video. Do let me know down in the comment section of what do you think of this deck profile for Favrneel. After like a few days and weeks of testing this deck alongside Melvin TCG on Twitter, as he will keep posting out results from my local scene as well. Do like and subscribe if you like this video, and of course during the bell notification icon so that you don't miss a video I upload. With that being said, I'll see you all on the field.
Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go. Go, 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 go.